Yogurt.
Yoga, good man. Um, so today we're going to talk about religion and science and how the two of them interact and how you reconcile your faith with science and that kind of thing. Um, I think both of us have kind of had that kind of scientific, kind of skeptic, questioning, a kind of very curious mindset. I
Mhm.
guess I think one of the big things I get asked, and I certainly had this in my group, was have you ever experienced anything that you can't explain that is kind of like supernatural almost, or you know what I mean? Is there anything in your life that you've experienced like that, and that's what's led you to faith, or has it always been you have a very structured naturalistic mindset and yet still have faith? So I think that's one of the things that I see people who don't believe kind of struggle with. That I think they feel like they don't have that belief in the supernatural. They've never seen anything supernatural, and so that's kind of what's holding them back. Everything's natural. There is only what we can see. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Uh, well, like nothing really jumps out. So, probably yeah. Even when I first became a theist, I guess I was very, very naturalistic in my mindset. So, I guess I was theist at the start. Um, Still there, your videos. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, no, I'm still there. So like you said, so you would say that no, probably you haven't. It hasn't been like you had some great supernatural experience that led to your faith.
Although,
Um,
the actual moment that I switched from atheist to theist
uh-huh.
was looking back on it, it was like oh, it was a pretty extraordinary event, like just in my mind,
Okay.
looking back on it, like could say it was a Holy Spirit kind of thing.
No, I did. I'm the same. I think it's something when I talk to other people who converted to Christianity, it's something I always feel kind of when people talk about my testimony. And a lot of religious people seem to think the testimony of somebody who's an atheist who doesn't believe and then converts to Christianity is incredibly powerful. And I always feel kind of like myself, like a little underwhelmed that by my story that there isn't this. It's not like Paul, walking down the street, is blinded by a flash of light, sees a vision of Jesus. You know what I mean? Like those to me, that would be an impressive testimony. Whether you buy into it, whether you think it was real or just a delusion or whatever. To me, that's an impressive testimony. That's a testimony you can go out there and people are like, "Wow, that's really cool." That really excites something inside me. When I look at my testimony and the other testimonies of atheists that we share on the atheistic Christianity forum and stuff like that, they're always these kind of like slow burns, like somebody just kind of goes, "Huh, okay, yeah, maybe there's something to it." You know what I mean?
Mhm.
To me at least, it never seems quite as impressive.
Yeah, I think very few of those stories were like, and then this happened and blah.
So
Those pretty dumb.
so what's your take on then the conflict thesis? I had a discussion with an atheist friend a while back, and his kind of view was that faith was completely incompatible with that line of thinking. And yes, there are Christian scientists and Christian thinkers out there, but for their view, it was a very compartmentalized worldview in that they had their religious views and then their kind of scientific day-to-day workings, and that the two didn't interact. That at no point did they bring their scientific questioning over to their religious beliefs. Um, the idea basically that as soon as they walk in the lab, they're a different person with a different mindset. They finish what they're doing in the lab, go home, go to church, and then they're completely different in terms of their mindset. Um, is that something you buy into? Do you see any conflict yourself with with kind of science and religion? Is it something you struggle with? Are there particular questions that you find difficult?
Yeah. I totally bought into the conflict thesis, as an atheist, because that's what you do. It just strikes me we just did the Socratic Club just did a debate about this. Um, But like when you're an atheist, it seems like like anybody who doesn't like anybody who isn't like a young Earth creationist and all this other stuff isn't actually Christian. You know, we talked about this quite a bit.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Um, and it's not that they're not Christian in that you discount their Christian, like they're not. What you think is, well, they're not really like a true Christian. They've realized the holes, they found the problems, and they're just trying to be sneaky and trying to sneak in a way to fix it. But clearly, they see the enlightened truth,
yeah,
and that it's not an honest kind of faith. They've found a way to deceive themselves so they don't have to give up their faith. At least
mhm,
that's how I saw it.
yeah, or or yeah, put up put up walls around their faith so that they don't have to deal with that. But
Yeah. So instead of being forced to say God did it and then God didn't do it, going, well, it doesn't matter, God's mysterious or whatever. Like you just avoid it completely. And you're like, oh well, that's just a cop out. Now you're not trying to provide an answer.
mhm, yeah, um, so yeah, I did like that kind of like compartmentalization and like maybe dualism is something I recognized would be a problem later on, very early, and I'd like put a lot of thought into like resolving that. Um,
I don't think it was a big deal for me. I guess I didn't have a lot of contact with Christians. I didn't have a lot of people that I knew that were Christian. The ones that I did were kind of the ones in my circles. Um, so they were kind of people in, the people from college or people from my industry, which is computing and stuff. So they tended to be more thoughtful and rational Christians. So I don't think I ever really bought into the conflict thesis. I guess some aspects of it, the kind of idea of Galileo being persecuted, that kind of thing, where if a scientist comes up with something against religion, then the church would cause a pull off and execute them, that kind of thing. I think that was something that I believed, but I didn't necessarily believe that religion and science were diametrically opposed, that they were always in conflict. I don't think I ever had that. But that said, I mean that um, there are still some things that I kind of struggle with. You know, one of the things that actually led to one of the main reasons that led me to my faith was kind of that question of what would what would convince you of the supernatural? What evidence would it take to convince you of the supernatural? And then you realize philosophically that given your worldview, there's nothing that would. And to me, it's kind of interesting, basically, to kind of come to that conclusion that, well, there's no evidence that could prove the supernatural, and then you adopt faith, and you have this belief in the supernatural, and
yeah,
it's like, but I have no evidence for it. That's something I still. Well, it's not to say I don't have any evidence for it. I have evidence for it. It's just it's not the kind of physical evidence I'd like that would make me comfortable.
yeah. I think I like in talking about science and faith and like evidence, like I feel like it's kind of necessary to first be like science, like the way we think about science has taken over the way we think about like knowledge, so that like if you have evidence if you want to have evidence for something, it has to be this kind of evidence, and that's not the case for like almost any other discipline.
Right, and that that is only one part of the philosophy of science. So that was
Mm.
uh, discovering the philosophy of science, because that was something that was kind of a bit of a mind blower for me. Was that you know I never really understood there was a philosophy of science. Science to me was simply you make a prediction, you predict an observation, you make the observation, you repeat the experiment. If the observation is repeatable, then it sort of bears out the theory.
Yeah,
But there's a
but
lot more.
philosophy of science, that's for like the people that are trying to trick you. That's not real.
Well,
No, I'm just kidding. that's
And
like
I think I've run into that with other atheists, where if you start to have a discussion about the philosophy of science, and they say, well, look, science has these underpinnings. There's a lot of hand waving that goes on there. That it's like, oh well, because I think the problem is the word philosophy is in there, and as soon as you mention the word philosophy, then it's a bunch of pointless navel gazing and chit chat that doesn't really mean anything. Like that's not real science. Like despite the fact that that's where empirical science comes from,
yeah.
it's all gone out of the conclusions of scientific philosophy that all kind of predated it. It's just yeah, but no, I didn't even know about philosophy of science, and it's really sad that I went to school. I was very good at science. I ended up going to college to study physics because I was going to, my original plan for my life was to be an astrophysicist. I really loved looking at the stars and kind of discovering what's in the universe, all that kind of
The
stuff.
telescope in the back.
Yeah, I love that thing. There's really cool place. One of the benefits of living in Texas is we're about 4 or 5 hours away from some of the darkest skies in the country. Um, and it wasn't until I moved here that I was able to get out there and go see the Milky Way. And like that was just wow. I took my kiddo out there, 2 o'clock in the morning, like waking him up. Come on, let's go see the Milky Way. They're cool. Um, so yeah, that was my original plan, but I don't think none of the syllabus ever really covered philosophy of science. Like that's really sad that you go to study science academically, and at no point do they talk about
Yeah.
here are the philosophical assumptions we have to make to even do science. One of the big ones, if you're going to talk about empirical science in that way, obviously the big underpinning is what you're talking about must be observable. So there are things out there that are not observable, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're supernatural. When we talk about the universe, there is an observable horizon, the point at which we can't see anything past. It doesn't mean there's nothing out there. It just means due to the way that light works and stuff. I don't want to get into too technical, but there's a horizon. Like when you stand in your outside your front door and you see the horizon, you can't see France and you can't see beyond it. They're out there, and it's just kind of coming up with how do we get out there and go see this thing. So we have that with our universe, and then you're left with that question of, this is something that cosmologists are doing now is what's out there, what's beyond the observable horizon. How do we figure out how do we get to that, knowing that none of what we have currently can observe it. There's no way to get any evidence of that, and that's a really interesting question for science. And I think a really interesting philosophical question as well, especially when you approach it with that original mindset of everything we talk about must have observable evidence. That's what evidence is. Evidence is observable evidence, directly observable. Because none of early cosmology has any observable evidence. It's guesswork that's kind of borne out.
Mm-hmm. Or what's the opposite method of here are my assumptions, so therefore the orbits must be perfectly circular, like that kind of thing.
Right, because then you start to rely not on empirical science, but falsifiability, right? It's whether a theory that you come up with has anything to dispute it, and there's a lot of that goes on in science. And I think for people who could approach, with a naturalistic view and this view of you have to have everything being empirical, that whole aspect of science is completely ignored by them, right? And I don't even think they're aware that a lot of science that's borne out and science that we apply in our lives today is all based on this opposite way of doing science, where we're just kind of creating these theories and looking for is there any evidence that disproves them? Well, if there's no evidence that disproves them, the theory seems sound, it makes reasonable predictions that come true, and that's a good enough theory. There's also this notion that when a theory is proven wrong, that it's completely scrapped. Like that's the benefit of science. This is another question you get into. The benefit of science is when science has something that is wrong, then we scrap it and we come up with a new theory, and that's not always the case. If there's not a better theory, if there aren't a bunch of competing theories that adequately explain, we'll stick to a theory even though it's got a couple of holes in it because it's our best guess. And we'll understand that there's those holes there and that there's a limitation of our knowledge. but we'll still go carry on with that. And that was really key to me, because when you kind of dispute the kind of religious thinking, that's typically the accusation that's laid at
Yeah.
religious thinking is you can know something as, if you will, quote, fact, but there can be evidence against it, but yet you still hold to that belief. And that happens in science. You know, you may find it not as egregious as, well, magic sky fairy made everything, sure,
Mhm.
but there is this idea of, you don't completely abandon a theory just because there's a couple of points that they're falsified against it. You can revise that theory, you can improve on it. You can go, okay, let's take a look at Genesis. Okay, evolution comes along. Okay, now let's take another look at Genesis. You know what I mean? That's still a very scientific way of approaching it, which is, again, something that changed in me, and kind of
Mhm.
made me realize that religion wasn't so much as clinging to these beliefs, like the Twain quote I think we talked about before, where it's when we talked about faith,
Yeah.
it's believing what you know isn't true.
Mhm. Yeah. So you mean like going back to the same text and like seeing it in a, or like seeing different facts come out of it because of um like different science that
Mm-hmm.
we know now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you also get the fact that there can be molding competing theories based on the same evidence. Okay, well, another kind of big downer is, well, if religion's true, why are there so many denominations? Why are there so many different religions? Well, if why are there so many competing versions of the multiverse theory? You know, we're working off limited data. We come up with a bunch of theories about based off the limited data, and some of those are going to be more true than others, and
Hmm.
the only way, I guess, you're going to find those out is by living them out, by investigating, by researching, rather than just kind of throwing your hands up and going, well, we've got 3 or 4 different good multiverse theories. We can never know which one's true.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Very
is
so.
there anything is there kind of any scientific discovery, or any scientific idea or ideology that to you helps bear out your faith, that kind of makes you go, yeah, I think that kind of helps.
Um, I'm not sure.
So like
Like,
I guess,
yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to get at the question. So like for me, one of the big things I used to do as a kid was, I guess, I love, like I said, talk about stargazing and going out there and seeing the Hubble deep images, seeing all the galaxies behind the black and empty space and stuff. That's crazy to me, and it really does kind of give us this scale of, we're not terribly important, and we're not. Uh, it kind of it makes me feel very humble, and that, to me, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that turns around and then kind of prove God kind of thing, but to me it gives me that sense of that religious kind of humility
Mhm.
that I experienced in Christianity, in a lot of the teachings there, that kind of sense, and having that, looking out of the universe and seeing how small and tiny and insignificant we are, gives me that same kind of wonder, that same kind of mystery, that same kind of uh, finding, like, talking about finding your place in the world type thing, where you're like, wow, all of my stuff, all of my problems, all of my issues, they're just not terribly important. Is there anything that is like that for you? Do you get
Um,
experience from?
like, yeah, one of the things like that I find really like weird is like I guess kind of like what I'm working on, materials. So I'm working with like atoms and like sometimes have to go into like quantum level stuff to like kind of figure out what's going on. It's like totally bizarre stuff, and like and it just gets weirder the further you go down. And it's like sometimes it's really, really um, interesting to me that these are the pieces that like God decided to put together to create the universe. which is really like bizarre. Like yeah, like just the foreignness of it is kind of um yeah, eye
It
opening,
does
mind
kind of
blowing.
seem almost constructed by a madman, though, especially when you start looking at the quantum mechanics. I actually had a conversation with my son this week that you might find funny. Um, he was talking to me. He's 5. He's fine. He sat at the dinner table and he asked me who made God. God made everything, right? Who made God? So we started having that talk and that discussion, and eventually he's like, "Well, well, maybe somebody had to make God." I'm like, "Well, then wouldn't that person be God?" And we had that kind of discussion. He goes, "Okay, well, maybe God was created by this cloud of stuff that you can't see, and maybe that's what created God." So I started to talk to him then about, well, okay, that's an idea of where everything came from. We have this quantum foam, and the entire universe comes out of that. And he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, so that's the thing." So he goes around proving his intelligence by saying that he's a clever clogs. Whenever he does something really smart, he's like, "I'm a clever clogs." So he looks at me after explaining quantum foam to him, to a 5-year-old, and he goes, "Daddy, I'm not a clever clogs anymore."
Yeah,
And I go, "Don't worry, son. Everybody feels that way when they encounter quantum mechanics. Like,
yeah.
everybody's brain just goes."
You will never understand unless you study it for 20 years and become a professor, and then you can take it.
Sure, and I think, on the flip side, this is going to be my next question: was is there some aspect of science that you feel would impact your religion, or take away from your religion, or is there something that could be proven with science that would diminish your faith? And I think that's you're hitting on something that would for me. I look at quantum mechanics and its incomprehensibility, um, as kind of a good thing, as kind of in terms of our religion and stuff. I think I would have real problems if we got to a point where we explained all of quantum mechanics. We knew how all of that works. We knew our complete origins for the universe. We know how the multiverse works. We know what's beyond the observable horizon. We figure all that stuff out. We know what everything is and all the components of the universe. That to me would seriously strain my religion, and not so much because we don't find God, right? We don't find God at the hiding behind a rock at the end of it all, going, "I did it," But I think it's really important, I guess, for my faith at least, that there's some aspect of that incomprehensibility to the universe. If the entire universe and everything that caused it can be completely understood by our tiny 3-pound brains, uh, the likelihood, or I don't want to say the need, but kind of like the idea of there being a complex and divine being, or a divine presence at the end of that, like it really diminishes that when the monkeys down on Earth manage to figure everything out.
Yeah,
Like, that would cause me problems. I think I would seriously have to question my faith, especially in terms of a personal um, deity, instead of something that's more like you know pantheism, I guess, where God is the universe type thing.
yeah. That's actually something I've given some thought to. And like, I don't know if this is like philosophy of science or something like that, but it seems to me like that you can never actually hit that point because like every step along, like like if you go, because I always think smaller, right? You go smaller. Um, like Greeks were like, it must be atoms. Atoms are the smallest thing. Like the Greeks do. That's just like the fundamental unit, obviously. And then like you break it up, you get smaller, you get smaller, you get smaller, and so now you got the Higgs boson and like all those other weird subatomic particles that I don't understand. And that like I don't know for sure, but if I don't think there's actually any like concrete evidence that we can't keep going.
That it's not turtles all the way down.
Yeah, or yeah, this is like something I think of like, and especially like just maybe like the other thing I think about is thermodynamics. Like so you got the three laws, and they're just like laws. You don't know why that's true. Like I don't I don't know that anybody knows why the second law of thermodynamics is true.
why it has to be.
Yeah,
But I mean, we have a lot of that, and then you start to get into the arguments of like fine tuning almost, because there are certain aspects of our universe and the way it's constructed that are true, and they necessarily need to be true. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here to talk about them. Like if they were changed, or like you said, the second law of thermodynamics wasn't true, or we wouldn't be here. These things wouldn't happen. Um, so
but
there's,
that's like that. Like if you're a, you know, I feel like if you're like a naturalist, that shouldn't prevent you from being like, well, like still, like why are the constants like that? Like maybe something happened at the moment the singularity blew up that determined those constants or something. Or like, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I think again that's one that I struggle with, and I think it's probably because my understanding is limited. It doesn't seem to struggle to people who are kind of like the leading brains in this. But this is one of the things that gets me, is this idea of the reason the constants are like that is, we just appeal to multiverse. We can just say, okay, you know what? The reason ours is a 6 instead of a 7 or whatever for any of the different constants is because there are all ranges of universes with all these different values, and we're just one of them, and every possible combination is out there. My problem with that is you're talking about a dice roll, and that you roll a set of dice and it comes up as a 6, and you go, well, of course it came up as a 6 because there's all these other different faces, but you don't know that those other values are out there. You could keep rolling that dice, and it's a loaded dice. It always turns up 6. um, just because it's not a loaded dice, right? Maybe it's completely fair dice. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to roll 6 times and get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So you have 6 universes out there with these different settings. you know you, to me, that doesn't seem to solve anything. It's deeply unsatisfying, because all it says is, we rolled a bunch of dice and we came up with this universe. It doesn't explain why those dice rolls came up there, why
Yeah,
the universe, the greater multiverse itself even rolls dice. Like, why why does it roll dice to create a universe? Why aren't all universes exactly the same? Like that just,
yeah,
yeah. Like you said, that there has to be something setting that or impacting that, and that's something we don't
yeah.
know. Maybe it's
Uh,
some energy or some aspect of quantum mechanics where all possible values are included, and then they resolve into one of them or something. But
yeah. So that's something I hadn't thought about. But like, yeah, that was one of the things I was like when I was an atheist, and I was, people would be like, "So Big Bang, fine tuning," and I'd be like, maybe multiverse, and then like I asked myself the question, like that doesn't help. Like, why multiverse? How how multiverse? And I was like, well, I guess there's no way really to get out of this, and that was
right, and it's not kind of turn around to then say, well, okay, I can't find the answer though, so then God did it. It's more just understanding that it is a problem, and I think as atheists we tend to have this habit of, in much the same way that the people that we would kind of talk against would be like, well, God did it, or the Bible says this, like, and that would be the end of the conversation. There would be no further discussion. In that same way, it sounds like you were the same. We tend to have this habit of, oh, okay, well, multiverse. Like, okay, but then there's a greater discussion that needs to happen. There's a great interview that was it Steven Weinberg, astrophysicist, talking to Dawkins, and talking on that subject. And I love it because Dawkins is all excited and like, oh well, just multiverse, right? That explains fine tuning. Weinberg just kind of, his whole face drops, and he's just like, we need a lot of universes, like, I can't remember what it is, 10 to the 256 or something ridiculous, universes to kind of to get away from the problem of fine tuning. And it's like, whoa. And it's interesting to see that, because like I said, we tend to go, oh, okay, well, there's a multiverse for every set of variables, and like I say, you see Weinberg coming up with that, why, and he's like, that's not really an answer. It's it's a problem. It's a huge problem. It's more universes than there are. I think it's. It's more than there are stars in our universe. I'm not sure it's more than there are atoms in our universe, but if not, it's
I
not
think
far
there's
off.
there's
It's
that yeah.
close.
That's definitely like a Google more atoms than there are in the universe, I think, at least.
Yeah, I think atoms it may be pushing it, but it's certainly a ridiculous number of universes. I think like I said, I worked it out. It was a universe for every star in our galaxy, and you put that in a container, and then you have one of those shipping containers for every star in our galaxy, and then you're getting close to the number of universes needed. It's like whoa.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think we tend to get into that mindset of well, science has provided the answer, and that's it. And then we don't need to do any more thinking on it. And like you said, we don't need to discuss philosophy of science. We don't need to ask if are there any more turtles underneath that turtle. It just is.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot when we talk about Big Bang, because a lot of people, I don't know if high school education didn't kind of move on as kind of stuck, but when I was taught in high school, what I was taught was Big Bang, right? Essentially, that everything came from this point singularity, and that's where the universe comes from. Now, science has moved on from there. We don't think that the singularity for the Big Bang is eternal. It was spontaneously created by a false vacuum. But what's interesting is you talk to people about origins, and when you talk about like God or whatever, and they say, "Oh, well, everything came from the Big Bang." And you're like, "Well, what created the Big Bang?" And they go, "Well, nothing. It just always was." It's like, well, no, like science has moved on.
Yeah.
No, the Big Bang singularity wasn't always. It did just, not create quite creation ex nihilo out of nothing, but it did just pop into existence from nothing, which is kind of interesting. When you're talking
Yeah.
about because I gave that a lot is it didn't just poof into existence from nothing. Well, it did poof into existence from nothing. The question is, did it poof into existence as an act of God, or did it poof into existence as an act of natural law? So,
Yeah. And that's you mentioned something. Oh, I've lost it. Oh yeah, yeah. Turtles all the way down. Um, I think like that's kind of one of the things I think like uh, thought I've had recently is maybe yeah like maybe it is turtles all the way down and like if this like like in a restored creation where like everyone basically you spend eternity what are you going to do with that time maybe you just get to do more and more complicated science forever and just keep looking at turtles.
that's an
I
interesting.
think that's kind of like a like that fits in kind of with like maybe um Eastern Orthodox I don't know if eschatology is the word but so because God is infinite you get to spend eternity like getting to know him better
That's actually kind of
and
beautiful. I like that.
yeah and
Especially when you
but
kind of think of that in terms of like the kingdom coming back on earth, right? And so the whole thing is creation gets restored. There is no evil. There is no suffering. There is, nothing but peace, joy, happiness, love, and all that kind of stuff. Death has been defeated. Evil's been defeated. And so all of humanity just sits around a test tube going, look, we found a smaller turtle. And then they go, okay, cool. And they all run back to their own microscopes and they're all kind of doing experiments. And look, I found an even smaller turtle. And like they all come running back, like
yeah
that's kind of cool. I like that.
yeah but yeah it's like and like as you go down you kind like I feel like or like as you go down things get kind of more intricate and complicated right
Well, I think
more
one of
simple
the things that's interesting is as you get further down, um, you're I don't know if I'm going to phrase this right now. I'm going to totally blow it, and I'm going to use the word faith, and it will turn everybody off. But your faith increases. So what I mean by that is, if you look at like just kind of building something with wood, right? You build a cabinet or whatever. It just you know there's not really a lot of thinking or anything that has to go on with that, like you're talking about, right? So then as you start to do chemistry, right? You're you're never kind of you're never guaranteed a result with chemistry. This is one of the things my chemistry teachers used to teach me was that yeah, you can have it down on paper and this is what should happen, but chemistry is volatile. Things, chemicals can break down, aspects can happen, things can get contaminated. Like there's other elements that can come into it. So there's an aspect of okay, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Then you get to quantum mechanics, and then it's like I feel like that's an aspect that's into it. As you get further down, like the more knowledge you have, but the less you know.
Hmm. Yeah, and like yeah, so things get like there's like paradigm shifts as you go. Um,
Like an
and
uncertainty principle. Like you can know where it is, or you can know how fast it's traveling, but you can't know everything because by observing it, you're going to affect it, and the um, the more closely you observe it, the more energy you're putting in, so the more you're going to affect the outcome. Like
mhm,
that, I love. Like because like I said, that to me is that kind of like, oh yeah, you can have more knowledge, you're just not going to be able to have any know anything out of it. Like I feel like
yeah,
that's a very kind of God thing.
so I do feel like as like there's not this sharp line between like science and faith. It's like this kind of like science kind of fades away into like not even the unknown, but like there's like cross fading into
Yeah, and
I
science
don't
has
know what.
to grasp at that unknown, and it does so in ways that they're very similar to how religion constructs its worldview. Um, that's just how it is, and that's just being honest. There's nothing inherently wrong about that, and it doesn't necessarily mean, well, religion, if down at the base of it, science makes these same kind of assumptions and same kind of grasping that the religious. No, it doesn't. It just means, you know, when you're throwing around things like, oh well, empiricism rules, like there's more knowledge to be had there. That's not the beginning and the end of it. It's certainly not for science,
Yeah.
which is good because otherwise science wouldn't be able to answer a bunch of the questions it's already been able to answer if it was mainly restricted by empirical knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, so let me think. You know what? Let's go with throw something out silly. Who's your favorite scientist? Who's your favorite kind of person who's done science? What's your favorite theory? That kind of thing.
I have no idea. Like I don't know if it's because of the way I was taught science, but we didn't learn many of the scientists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess like superconductivity is oneness or whatever, but Dutch guy. Except he was kind of a jerk. And he made his grad students do all the work and then didn't write their names on the papers. So let's not pick him. Um,
Yeah, but you only say that because you're working out. What, you've got a bunch of grad students that you can crib off? Like you'll think it's the greatest thing ever. Like you'll be like, no, I earned my way here. This is how it works.
okay. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I need to read more lives of scientists.
Well, that's fine. I think for me, I guess I probably would have originally, like before being a Christian, kind of answered somebody like Einstein. I think Einstein's really interesting because um, Einstein was somebody who, when he first proposed this stuff, was kind of beaten down because um, he wasn't Newton, and who was he to question Newton?
Mhm.
I thought that was really quite cool when you start reading up about that. This idea that you have as somebody who's a proponent of science, that science is open to new ideas. There's no, but you almost get away from the idea that personality at all affects science, that it's very cold and calculating and rational. And then, you read up on things like this where, Einstein proposes his theories and they're all like, well, you're basically saying that Newton's full of crap. Like, who are you? Like, no, all of our physics is based off Newtonian physics. Like, no, you don't. You young upstart, you don't get to say Newton's wrong. And like it turns out, as they start evaluating his stuff, it's like, oh, okay. Once he finally gets the observable proof of the bending of light around stars, stuff like that, then yeah, he starts to get credit for it and starts to
Yeah.
get. I thought that was really cool because, like I say, when you're a proponent of science, you don't feel like science is like will allow that kind of thing, like that kind of behavior is just complete no. But there's
Yeah.
still rock stars in science. There's still personalities and egos. Um, and I think now probably it's Lemaitre for the Big Bang. Like because I
I
think one of the things I love about that is it kind of flips the narrative of the idea of what's it called when you go to the gaps. There we go. It kind of flips
mhm.
that narrative around, right? So the idea is throughout human history, the universe just is, it's eternal, right? So Aristotle, says the Earth is eternal, the Earth just is, it goes through cycles. Then we start to learn about the Earth, we start to learn about geology, thanks to Nicholas Steno and stuff, and other people, and we start to see that no, the Earth isn't eternal. The Earth actually was created. It has an age. There are different strata with animals in there, and we use that then to go look at like how animals evolved and what animals were present in the different ages and stuff, fossils. So we start to go, okay, well that's not true. But the universe is still eternal, right? And then Lamatra comes along and he's like, well, no, it kind of came from this primeval atom. And they're like, no, you're just trying to inject God into it. Like, there is no need for a starting point. And then you have Hubble going, no, yeah, it all came from the. It's amusing to me because it flips it around. It's this idea that we always say the universe is eternal, and then get back to what we're talking about there with the Big Bang. Well, then, okay, if the universe isn't eternal and it all came from the Big Bang, then the Big Bang singularity is eternal, right? That's our that we can hold on to that. That always was. We don't need anything there. Nope, that poofed into existence from a false vacuum. Okay, right. Well, the false vacuum and the laws of quantum mechanics, they always were. They're the constant that we absolutely hold on to. They're the eternal part of the universe. Like, it just yeah. So I think I really like that, and I never really understood that the Big Bang, as a phrase, was meant as an insult, and I think it's really kind of cool now that that a Catholic, I think he was Catholic, comes up with the Big Bang, gets insulted for it and ridiculed that he's putting God in it, and now we use the Big Bang as evidence we don't need God. I think that's really funny. I think it's really funny. In less than 100 years, it goes from this is you trying to put a proof of God in the universe, and it's not true, to it's true, and therefore we don't need God. That's
Yeah.
I think it's. I don't think I have anything
Like,
else. You have anything you want to say, man?
you made me think of a couple things.
Okay.
Well, I can't remember if it's. I should look this up, but either Schrodinger or Heisenberg, one of those big quantum guys, was went he was an atheistic Christian, um, um, devoted to Lutheran, I think.
I'm sure he recanted on his deathbed. That can't be right.
Yeah, that's it's just not right. No, but like one of the things he said was like the first draft of the physical sciences will make you an atheist, but God is waiting for you at the bottom or something like that.
Yes. I remember that one. Isn't it like the first drop, and then the last will make you yeah.
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 Um,
And I think that's definitely true. I think um, I see that a lot with other people. Where they kind of fall out of Christianity, then fall back in.
mhm. Yeah, because science, obviously, but then philosophy of science, kind of what the matter.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's what it comes down to is you you kind of fall out of it because you start to become in love with um, in quotes, truth and fact, and you have a great deal of difficulty with, you believe it because the Bible says so or whatever. And I think that's why a lot of people fall out. And then when you fall back in, I think like when I shared that testimony of Science Mind, the guy that's out there doing that podcast, kind of doing a lot of science and religious stuff, kind of integrating together. Like his testimony was not, oh, I found proof or whatever. His was, oh, I learned to kind of embrace the mystery. There's something I can't explain. There's something to it. It just it is. And when he talks about like, oh, you saying Jesus is the only way to salvation, he's like, no, look, I'm saying Jesus was my salvation. It may or may not be the salvation for you. I thought that was, to me, that seems, like that kind of thing. Now, with my story, it's not a particularly mystical or experience. It is a very kind of, I started to question my stuff. I think you were similar. And then, there was another guy on that atheist Christianity, whose name I forget. So why I'm even talking about it, I don't know. But again, he had a very kind of rational, I'm going from this to this. And it wasn't what I call like a spiritual or a supernatural experience. It was very logical and rational. And yeah, I think it just comes down to you start to question certain things that you've always assumed and certain things that as facts, and you start to go, well, okay, I'm not as sure as I was in there, and then you start to reevaluate your position.
Yeah, I think like the first way, like going from maybe like religious to atheist. often happens because there's like a consistency and like a structure to science that isn't there maybe in the like original faith, and people go back when they realize that there's actually something richer here than what you were raised with.
Yeah, I think the other thing is as well is um, it, science is very impersonal. By that, I don't necessarily mean it's antagonistic, but I mean that it's not. It doesn't have an ego. It doesn't have um, personalities. It doesn't have that kind of sense of getting a fence and all that kind of thing. Whereas, and I think that's what a lot of what attracts people out of it is with religion is there's this always this sense when you're questioning and when you're doing this um, that people get offended and people get hurt by that. You know, nowhere is that more evident when somebody says to you like, "Oh, I'm not going to your church. I'm going to go to a different church." We'll all profess the fact that there are different churches, there are different churches for different people. Like, there's a huge body of Christ, and like you may not fit here or there. And yet, the instant that somebody turns around and says, like, "Oh, well, I'm not sure I'm a good fit at this church. I'm going to try this other church," like, half the congregation's like, "Well, they're dead to us." Like you don't tend to get that with that science kind of view. Like, there's not that sense of, well, I'm going to go over here, but no, you're done.
Like maybe I don't think string theory is no. I don't know if that happens.
Yeah, but it's not kind of like, oh well, if I like biology over physics, then I'm sure there probably are like these huge groups of biologists who are like, screw the physicists.
Probably.
You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like people get as offended as much,
No.
and there isn't that sense of personality. So, all right, man. Well, appreciate you being here this morning.
Yeah.
Thanks for the
Fun.
talk. All right, and we'll see you next time.